Welcome to Unsightly Opinions. If you're new, my name's Tamara, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my journey into vision loss, talk about my albinism, the reasons for my blindness, and share more of that personal story that I haven't really shared with the internet yet. This is something that's a little bit more vulnerable for me, so it's taken a lot of time for me to talk myself into doing it, but I think it's an important story to share because I know there are many of you out there that have a similar story, or maybe it will give you an idea of what it's like living as a blind or low vision person. February is International Low Vision Awareness Month, and I think it's really appropriate that this is the time to talk about my visual experience. If you're curious about what I see, I will be doing another video. It needs its own dedicated video, I think. Watch for that next Saturday. Subscribe, hit those notification bells so you can be sure not to miss that. Before I get into the video, I do want to preface it with two small statements. First, this is my experience with vision loss, this is my experience with albinism, and while many people may have a similar experience, no two people with vision loss have the same experience. And I am telling you my story. I'm not trying to speak for an entire community of wonderfully diverse and unique individuals. Second, I want to mention that I will talk about some pretty heavy subject matter, some trigger warning type territory with bullying and low mood and mental health stuff. So if that's something you are not comfortable with, please just pop back next week. My albinism journey is a little bit different than most because I was not diagnosed right away. When I came into the world almost 3 decades ago now, I don't think information was as readily available. It was a long journey until I was in kindergarten when I finally got diagnosed. I think my grandmother was the first person to recognize that there was something wrong with me. My eyes constantly shake. They still do today. She noticed that I wasn't tracking properly. I wasn't following things around me the way most babies do, and she suggested to my parents that I go see the doctor. As years went by and I started to come into my own being, they noticed some significant differences to other children. I would wail when I was in the sun, and no other kid seemed to do that. I would burn really easily, and as I began to crawl and do my own things, I was a terror. My parents believed me to be the most accident-prone, clumsy, dangerous child they'd ever seen. It was to the point that they were going to consider putting my sister in a helmet when she was born several years later. I took out dishwasher doors with abandon. I must have wrecked 3 or 4 screen doors running straight through them. I tripped down concrete stairs and cracked my head open. I ran into doorknobs. I walked into walls, but my parents had never had a child before, so they just assumed that that was normal clumsiness for a baby. I never knew I was different. My parents certainly didn't treat me any different. They just raised me as their child. So when I finally got into school programs and I was enrolled in a French immersion kindergarten, they believed that I was ADHD, that I was cognitively delayed, that I had a variety of intellectual disabilities, and none of those things were true. They wanted me to get put on Ritalin. They thought that I was a disruption to the class, I wasn't following along with the teacher, and they didn't know what to do with me. So my parents went back to the doctor and said, "This doesn't seem right. My child is really bright, she's talking well above her age, she's really independent, she's well behaved. I don't understand why they're telling us that she's not paying attention in class, she's not looking at the teacher, she's not doing this, she's not doing that," and they want to put her on Ritalin. And that's when the doctor finally told them, "Oh no, your child is blind." That was the moment that everything changed. There was some suggestion that I would lose my vision as a teenager. There was some suggestion that it would be stable my entire life. They didn't really know what the prognosis was. So my life turned upside down overnight. I had an EA brought into the classroom. They were going to try and show me all of these visual things. They were going to try and give me as many experiences as they could before I lost my vision. Later, they found out that albinism is typically not progressive, so I'd probably keep the vision I had. As a kid, my vision, while I consider it to be fantastic compared to what I have right now, is really poor. I would describe my vision as a child as just enough to get me into trouble. I could read super large print. I could get around relatively well. I'd walk into things, but I could get around relatively well. I didn't have any depth perception, so stairs were always a challenge. And I just made my way through life. I didn't understand, even when my parents sat me down and said, you have albinism, it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't have anything to relate to. I didn't understand that I was different, so I was just me. That all changed in the first grade when I was sat down with both grade 1 classes and my teachers, and everyone was handed glasses covered in hot glue or blindfolds except me. And they told every single student in that room how I was different. I was a generally happy child, but it was in that moment I truly experienced my first sensation of loss and anger. I didn't understand in that moment that I was different. I didn't understand that there was anything wrong with me until they sat me down with all of my friends, all of my peers, and pointed out to every single one of them how different and scary I was. You can't do this like this with Tamara because that'll hurt her. You have to treat Tamara like that because of this. And I went from having dozens of friends that morning to having no friends that afternoon. It was traumatizing. I felt different for the first time in my life. When you're a kid, I don't think you understand, even when you have to make little accommodations for yourself, that you are different, that everyone has a different experience. But that made it concrete for me. I didn't care that I had an EA in the classroom helping me do things. I didn't care that I had to wear sunglasses and a hat outside. That was just me. That was just something I did. Some kids did that, some kids didn't. It didn't really matter. And it didn't seem to matter to my peers. But telling my peers they had to treat me differently really affected me. So the school tried to make up for lost time. They wanted to put me with a buddy at recess, so when kids ran away from me and I couldn't tell where they were anymore, I'd always have a friend with me. That only served to isolate me further. I couldn't hang out with the people I wanted to hang out with, and I was a burden to whoever I was paired with at recess. It was a horrible experience. It was very lonely. I did have a few wonderful friends in my life who didn't abandon me, who wanted to be my friend, who didn't care that I was different. But it took many years to come to terms with who I was. When my parents decided it was time for me to start learning Braille in about grade 2, I fought them. For me at that time, blindness was the enemy. Anything that set me apart as different, using a white cane, wearing a hat, anything that physically separated me from my peers was horrible. Not to mention that the times that they actually took me out of class was when everybody else got to do fun things like art or watch movies or have parties. So I missed out on a lot of those fun experiences because I needed to learn blind things. I'm okay with all of this now, but it was a difficult experience. What I do appreciate is my parents wanted me to have every single experience a regular, average, sighted child would have. I did dance classes, I did skating, I did Girl Guides, I did music, I did swimming, you name it, I probably did it for at least a year. They wanted to make sure I had a very round experience from which to draw an idea of the world. And I'm so incredibly grateful that they did. They worked with me on social skills, they worked with me on maintaining eye contact, they worked with me on table manners, things that you would take for granted as a sighted person. Facial expressions, maintaining eye contact, gesturing, those were all things that I had to learn mostly by rote. So my parents really went the extra mile to make sure that I could integrate as well as possible. They wanted to make sure that I had all the skills to use the vision I had, but make sure that I had backup plans should that vision fail. Throughout my schooling, I experienced a variety of bullying, not only from peers, but from teachers of all people, who assumed I didn't deserve a place in their classroom because I was the way I was. I had an EA who wasn't doing their job and wasn't giving me alternate formats, so I went from an A student to a C student in the 6th grade. I was struggling, and the reports that my teachers were giving my parents was that I was lazy, I was disorganized, and that I was a terrible student and I wasn't smart, so they should just give up on me. Thankfully, my parents are smart people and they don't necessarily take what they're told at face value, and they ended up figuring out what was going on, so I had to move schools. It was around that time that my vision started failing. While I tried to not use my cane at school, It no longer became an option, it was a necessity. I needed to use it to get around safely, otherwise I'd walk into everything. The new and unfamiliar environment, I couldn't fake that I was seeing really well anymore. I was walking into too much, and it became a safety risk. So when I went to my new school, I had a cane, but for the first time in my life, I had another friend who was blind, and she was using a cane, so I didn't feel so alone. When I was in my other school before, I was the only blind and low vision student there. I was the only person who needed to use accommodations. When my vision started failing, I noticed that things weren't quite the way they were. I couldn't focus for a long time. I was getting hideous migraines. I couldn't seem to see things that made sense a few days before. Things weren't quite the way they were supposed to be. And while albinism is typically stable, at that point they assumed mine wasn't. They didn't know why, but I started losing my vision. It wasn't until significantly later that we understood that it wasn't the albinism that was causing my vision loss. It was another condition. And here, 15 years later, I'm still waiting for genetic testing to confirm what that is, although they do suspect it's some form of optic nerve atrophy. I was trying to go through a very difficult transition in my life. As I was transitioning schools to an English school from my French immersion school, I was trying to deal with my vision loss. Anytime I mentioned not being able to see something, my parents were so distraught that I thought it would be better if I just pretended to be sighted. So I assumed that being blind was the enemy again, and I hid it. And it became harder and harder and harder to hide as my vision progressively got worse, and it became so impossible to read large print anymore that I ended up transitioning full-time into Braille. As I moved into junior high school and as I moved beyond, I got into lots of circumstances where I was being accused of faking being blind. I had learned to pretend so well. My parents had taught me so many coping skills to look like I was managing so well that people assumed I could see more than I could see. And that's a double-edged sword. While people saw me as normal, I was being bullied now because people thought I was faking, because people assumed that I was faking being blind because it was easier. Let me tell you, being blind is not easy. It is the antithesis of easy. I started losing color perception, and I started losing definition. Not that I had much before, my vision sucked, but it was fading away day by day, and I just had to learn to get on with it. I just had to cope. I had a series of other things going on in my life at that time. My mother got sick and she had terminal cancer, so I just had to get on with life. I just had to focus with putting one foot in front of the other, and I couldn't deal with my own issues. I had to just keep moving. When I got to high school, the bullying was intense. I was depressed from the death of my mother. I was not coping very well because I hadn't dealt with the emotions associated with my vision loss. I felt like nobody believed me. I felt very alone. I did have some very good friends who defended me, but that didn't stop the bullying. It didn't stop people from pushing me downstairs. It didn't stop people from deliberately tripping me in the hallways to make me drop everything I was carrying. And it was rough. I had to do everything differently than the way I did it before. I had to figure out all kinds of systems to try and make things work. And at every step and every turn, it seemed like people didn't want me because of my blindness. For me, the albinism never seemed to be the biggest issue. It didn't need all that much accommodation. So long as I was wearing sunscreen and was careful about how long I spent outside, so long as I was in my sunglasses, so long as I had a hat, I was great. I've been called all kinds of names: ghosty, albino, said in a very derogatory way, demon child. I've had people run away from me screaming when they saw me in an elevator, but that never really bothered me. I was fairly confident with who I was. I accepted my physical appearance, and maybe because I couldn't see myself in the mirror anymore. I just didn't care. I cared about what I looked like. I cared about how I dressed. I cared about learning how to do makeup, but I just didn't care what people said. It was when people attacked my vision that it really hurt. Probably because I hadn't come to accept that yet. I was determined to go to university. I was determined to go into research science. I was determined I was going to help people in all of the ways that I had been ignored my entire life. And when I got to the university, I was accepted and I was told I wouldn't be able to take any of the courses I wanted because of my blindness. I was told, well, I could try, but I wouldn't succeed. And this is from people who are trained to accommodate people with disabilities. It was incredibly disheartening. I wasn't provided with any of the materials I need. I wasn't provided with anything that I really needed to succeed in school because it was, quote, too hard. I wasn't given an equal opportunity. When my friends started looking for part-time jobs to help pay for things, I was turned down more times than I could count. I applied to every supermarket. I applied to every administrative position. Anything I could find that was an entry-level job, I was turned down for. I felt like I wasn't wanted. I never wanted to hide my visual impairment. That was never my goal. I wanted to be me. I wanted to authentically be me. And I found that the world seemed to not want me to be me. I couldn't do what my peers were doing. And it wasn't about wanting to work at the superstore. It wasn't about wanting to work a minimum wage job. It was wanting to be accepted as normal. And I never found that. The only positions that I've ever had in a very traditional sense in terms of a mainstream job, I ended up getting because people saw me doing the job as a volunteer first. They saw my capabilities as a volunteer going above and beyond, and then decided I was worth hiring. I never got the job when I was trying to look for work actively. And again, it made me feel like I was second class. It can be incredibly disheartening to feel like you aren't as valuable as somebody else. Even with an education behind you, even with qualifications, aren't good enough for a job. And I feel that that's a common experience in the blind and low vision community. People tend to judge on first appearance, and rather than give you an opportunity to explain yourself or let you know what you could improve or even give you a chance to try something new, they like to shut you down because it's new or different or scary, or they feel like it's going to be too much work. So here I am today. I have come through a whole lot to be on the other side. I don't work a traditional 9 to 5. I do all kinds of things that I'm, quote, not supposed to do because I'm blind, just because people told me I shouldn't. Whether that's downhill skiing or swimming or skating or rock climbing or horseback riding. I feel that it's important to show what is possible with the right accommodations, but I know that my experience is very privileged because I was able to actively seek out those kinds of experiences. I had the financial ability as a young person in a middle-class home to have those experiences, to be given opportunities to try new things, to have parents that pushed and advocated for me every step of the way. It's a challenge, and I don't want to lie or minimize how much work it's been to get to where I am now. I am proud of who I am. I am proud of all of the battles I've fought, all of the ones I've lost, all of the ones I've won. I have taken something away from that. I feel like I am a stronger person because of what I've had to go through because of my vision loss. There are many things that are far worse than the bullying and discrimination that I've experienced that people go through on a daily basis, but I do feel that the adversity that I've had to deal with has helped me become a person I can be proud of. And I would not want to be somebody else. If you were to ask me if I'd want a cure for my vision loss, I'd probably say no, even if there were no risks. And I know that's probably counterintuitive for most people. I know many people would give anything to get their vision back. I don't think I need that to be happy. I am happy with who I am, and I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I'm happy to be bringing awareness to the blind and low vision community, and I'm happy to try new things even if I have to do them differently. If I had to leave you with some advice, I would say try and surround yourself with people who lift you up, not bring you down. There are so many wonderful people in the world that will give you an opportunity, but you may not find it first time out. There is usually a silver lining, even if it takes you 10 years to find it, and tomorrow can be better. Those are the things that I try and remind myself every day. If you have an interesting story, if you have a disability, if you have a visual impairment or you're blind, I'd love to hear your individual experiences in the comments down below. If you like content like this, please don't forget to subscribe, hit those bells and buttons, join me on Twitch. We have an accessible Twitch stream, usually Tuesdays and Sunday nights, 7:30 Mountain Standard Time, and you can check out my other social media accounts linked in the description down below. But that's all for today. Bye for now.